Okay, so election season, right? Everyone's glued to the polls, trying to figure out who's up, who's down, who's going to take it all.
Right.
But we're going deeper. You've been digging into this. Like these online betting markets, are they actually shaping the race or are they just reflecting it?
Yeah.
You've got some fascinating sources for us to kind of unpack today.
Yeah, it is interesting the way that these markets I don't know, they kind of capture the attention, right?
Yeah.
And it actually reminds me of a lot of other moments in history, really, when you've seen predictions, especially tied to money, just go completely off the rails.
Right.
And it just shows you how important it is to, to really think critically when you have those two things, when you have big money and information sort of colliding.
Absolutely. And speaking of fascinating and fueled by money, you've been looking into Polymarket.
Right.
Now, some people listening might not be that familiar. So in a nutshell, what is it?
So imagine like a platform where you're not just, sharing opinions, but you're actually putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak, with cryptocurrency.
Okay.
And you're betting on real world events.
Mm.
And right now, everybody's betting on the election.
Right. And it's gotten a lot of attention, a lot of traction, especially, I mean, Elon Musk has been kind of hyping it up
Yes.
as, maybe more accurate than traditional polls.
Right.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Polymarket is showing a considerable lead for Trump.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's what has people talking, right?
Yeah.
So there was a Wall Street Journal investigation, and they uncovered that there have been just massive sums of money. We're talking millions of dollars poured into Polymarket.
Wow.
Specifically bets on Trump.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that it's coming from like a very small number of accounts.
So not just like your average Joe placing a bet. These are like high rollers making waves.
Exactly. Exactly. It's not small potatoes. These are big bets.
Yeah.
So, and that makes their potential impact on the platform's prediction model really significant.
Right.
And that begs the question,
Yeah.
what are we really looking at here? Is this organic or is this being influenced by these really outsized investments? And I think to understand this, it's important to kind of back up for a second and just talk about how Polymarket actually works.
Yeah. Break it down for us.
So when you place a bet, right, you're essentially buying into a prediction.
Okay.
So let's say you think Trump is going to win.
Yeah.
So you would buy a share, so to speak, of that prediction.
Right.
And the more people buy into that prediction, the higher the price of that share is going to go.
Okay.
And the higher Trump's chances of winning, at least as far as the platform is concerned.
So it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
In a way, exactly. Exactly. If enough money flows in one direction, it can really start to skew the perceived odds, even if those odds don't actually reflect, broader reality.
Right.
And so that's why this Wall Street Journal investigation, I think, is so important here, because these few accounts with these just enormous bets
Right.
could actually be artificially inflating the perception of a Trump victory.
Which then, I mean, if people are looking at that as, oh, this is what's happening, then they might be more inclined to, I don't know, put their own money in that direction as well.
Exactly.
And then it just solidifies that.
Exactly. It's like a snowball effect. And that's why it's so important, I think, to really understand, how these platforms work.
Right.
The role of cryptocurrency, the potential influence of these large bets, like all of that is really crucial for anyone who's trying to make sense of what these platforms are actually telling us.
Okay, so we've got these, like you said, these massive bets potentially skewing things. But is it possible that this is just a bunch of wealthy Trump supporters and they're just really confident?
Yeah, that's the question, right? I mean, is this just, really enthusiastic support, or is this something more calculated?
So we've been talking about, is this manipulation? Is this not? But some people are saying that just because these huge bets are coming in for Trump, that doesn't automatically mean something fishy's going on.
Right, exactly. And one Rutgers professor made the point that, theoretically, someone could just have both.
Right.
They could have the resources and they could have the conviction to place those kinds of bets because they just believe that strongly in a Trump victory.
Okay, so big bets alone, maybe not a smoking gun. But how do we know then when it's actually happening? Like, what does market manipulation actually look like in action?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
I think, one way to think about it is imagine, like, the stock market, right?
Right.
And you have someone who wants to artificially inflate the price of a stock that they own,
Yeah.
right? So they start buying up huge quantities of that stock,
Hmm.
even if that stock isn't actually performing very well. But that creates like a buzz, right?
Yeah.
It creates this perception of success, which then in turn attracts other investors.
Right. So other people are like, oh, I want a piece of that.
Exactly. Exactly. They see the price going up. They're like, well, this must be, this must be the hot stock.
Right.
I'm going to get in on this too. And so the price climbs even higher,
Right.
fueled by this, this artificial demand.
Right.
And then at a certain point, when the price is high enough, the manipulator, the person who kind of set this whole thing in motion,
Right.
they cash out.
Uh-huh.
They sell their shares.
They make all the money.
They make a huge profit. Exactly. Exactly.
And then everyone else is holding the bag.
And the price plummets, right? And everyone else is left holding the bag. And that's like, that's your classic pump and dump scheme.
Right, right. So in that case, though, like the manipulator is directly profiting from that swing that they created.
Right.
How would that work with Polymarket in the election, though? Because it's not like they're going to cash out on a Trump presidency if they've rigged the odds, right?
Well, that's true. And that's where I think it gets a little bit more nuanced, right?
Okay.
It becomes less about direct financial gain from the bets themselves,
Okay.
and more about trying to influence perception,
Okay.
right? Trying to create this aura of inevitability around a Trump win.
So it's less about making money off of that one stock in that moment and
Right.
more about kind of manipulating the market as a whole, or even, I don't know, public opinion, on a grander scale.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what some experts are suggesting might be happening here with Polymarket. There's a professor from Barnard College who specializes in market manipulation.
Okay.
And she was pointing out that this flood of pro-Trump bets, it really aligns with a pattern of artificially boosting perception.
Right.
So it's about creating a narrative that Trump is actually doing better
Right.
than he might be according to, other indicators.
And then that narrative in and of itself, I mean, that perception can almost become its own reality because people start to see, oh, well, this is what's happening. And then they're more likely to maybe donate to the Trump campaign or volunteer their time or, who knows, maybe even base their vote off of something like that.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, you're hitting on all cylinders here because it's not just about winning bets on Polymarket, right?
Right.
If this is in fact manipulation, then it's about potentially influencing the actual election itself.
It's a chilling thought. It really is. And it makes you wonder, like, are these people who are placing these bets, are they even genuinely confident in Trump? Or are they just trying to game the system for, for their own ends?
That is the million-dollar question. And it raises, I think, even bigger questions, right? About, like, the role of these online platforms in shaping public discourse and potentially even influencing real-world events.
It's definitely something to consider, especially as we're getting closer. And it's not just Polymarket, right? You mentioned that there are other platforms that are kind of showing Trump ahead as well. So we've got Polymarket, and it's maybe, showing us one little piece of the puzzle, but it could be skewed. But you were saying that some other betting platforms are also kind of leaning toward Trump, but maybe not as drastically.
Yeah, that's right. Platforms like Betfair, Predict, they're also showing Trump ahead.
Right.
But, it's important to remember that these platforms all have like different methodologies,
Right.
different user bases, different levels of what they call liquidity. So, it is interesting when you see similar trends kind of popping up across multiple platforms.
Right.
But, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a guarantee.
Right. It's not a crystal ball.
Yeah.
And it makes me think about that comment that you mentioned earlier where someone had called Polymarket voodoo, right?
Yes. Simon Rosenberg, who's a Democratic strategist, he kind of dismissed it as like Polymarket voodoo, implying that it's, based more on superstition or manipulation than any real insight.
Which, I mean, given what we've just been talking about, like the potential for manipulation there, it makes you wonder, is there any value in these platforms at all? I mean, should we even be paying attention to this, especially as we're getting closer and closer?
Right. And I think that's the question, right? I mean, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about critical thinking.
Right.
I think they can be interesting data points.
Yeah.
But it's really crucial to understand their limitations. And I think, one of the big ones is that betting odds are not the same as polling data.
And we're still seeing a very tight race when you look at most polls that are out there.
Exactly. So, a lead on Polymarket doesn't directly translate to a lead in the polls or, more importantly, a lead in the actual election. I mean, they're measuring, different things.
Right.
Polls are, they're trying to gauge public opinions.
Through surveys and statistical analysis, whereas prediction markets, even assuming that there's no manipulation going on, they really reflect the kind of collective wisdom or maybe, the collective bias of their
Right.
users, many of whom, may be motivated more by, profit than accurate forecasting.
Right. So you could see like a 20-point lead and think, well, it's a done deal. When in reality, it's like, no, it's still anyone's game.
Exactly. And that's why, I think it's so dangerous to rely on any single source of information,
Right.
especially in something as complex and as consequential as a presidential election. So, don't just check Polymarket or any, single betting market. Look at the polls, read analyses from reputable sources.
Right.
But, most importantly, engage those critical thinking skills.
So diverse information and a healthy dose of skepticism. I like it.
Absolutely.
Those are our best bets, so to speak, this election season.
Well said. Well said. It sounds like we need a whole nother deep dive on how to actually interpret polls, right?
I'd say so.
But we'll save that for another day. But I think we've given our listeners a lot to digest today. This has been really fascinating.
We have. And, it does raise one final and I think kind of unsettling question. Let's say, hypothetically, that despite these leads that we're seeing in some of these betting markets, Trump doesn't win.
Right.
Could he potentially point to this discrepancy
Oh, wow.
to, as some might call it, this voodoo, to kind of fuel claims of election fraud?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Even if those betting odds were influenced by the very manipulation that we've been talking about.
Now, that is a thought-provoking and honestly slightly terrifying thought. It adds a whole other layer to this, doesn't it? It really does. And it's, like you said, information, disinformation, it's everywhere these days. We really have to be, extra vigilant, I think.
I agree. It really highlights, I think, how easily even these seemingly objective platforms can be manipulated and the very real consequences that manipulation can have on our democratic processes.
Right. And for everyone out there, it's a stark reminder that critical thinking now more than ever is not just some academic exercise. This is essential for just navigating our world. Well, dear listener, we'll leave you with that sobering thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the strange world of election betting. Remember, stay informed, stay critical, and as always, keep those minds curious.